Hello everyone, this is an introductory Illustrator tutorial where we will learn the basics in Illustrator as we create analysis drawings for our Invisible Cities collages. So when you open Illustrator, it'll look something like this. What I want to do in this case is open my Invisible Cities drawing. So I'm going to go and click open. I'm going to navigate to wherever it's saved on my computer and then open the file by selecting it and clicking the open button. I'm zooming out by holding Alt or Option and using the scroll bar on my mouse. But so my Invisible Cities collage will open and look something like this. Just to give a basic rundown of how Illustrator functions or works, this is what is called a workspace. If you go to Window at the top, you can select Workspace and select from a variety of different kind of default options. Your version of Illustrator might look a little different than what this looks like, but if I select Layout, notice that some of the panels on the right hand side change. If I go back to Essentials, is what I normally work in, it looks something like this on your screen. If you're missing any of these along the way during this tutorial, you can go to Window and find them all located here. So the important ones I would say to open would be Layers, for this tutorial, Color, Swatches, Color Guide, and Stroke. We might use a couple others along the way, but make sure those are open, at least in the beginning. On the left-hand side are all of your tools. We'll go over some of these tools in the beginning of the tutorial. And then up at the top is this panel. It changes. Notice that things change as you select things in the drawing itself. If you don't have something selected, it looks something like this. It also changes when I use different tools. So when I click that type tool, suddenly there's some options up at the top right about the type tool itself. So this will change throughout the day as we're working. So one of the things that I like to have on when I'm working are the rulers. So you can open those by hitting Command or Apple R, Control R. That opens up the rulers. You can set them by right-clicking on the ruler itself to, I work in inches typically because that's what I'm printing on a piece of paper, so inches. Not necessary, but I like having them on so I can understand how big something is when I would go to print it in real life. So the first thing that's important about Illustrator is that it functions similarly to Photoshop in that it uses layers. Right now the default is that the image itself comes in on a layer. To make a new layer, you hit the little piece of folded over paper. You can make lots of layers. This is the eyeball that turns on and off the visibility of a layer. You can lock a layer, meaning if you click the little lock button, you can't edit anything on the layer itself. You can rename a layer by double-clicking on the text. So I might rename this as Collage. I'll unlock it for a second. This little circle, if you click the circle, it will select everything on the layer itself. And then if you click and drag, so I'm clicking and holding down and dragging that little square up, what that does is it moves the selection to the layer that you're dragging it to. So if I click back on the collage layer, maybe I'll just draw a rectangle to show you how this works. But so if I have this rectangle selected and I click and drag and hold, and then release, now suddenly that rectangle is on layer 3 instead of the collage layer. So it's a quick way of moving things from layer to layer. So you select them, click, drag, and hold. So there's my collage. Just delete out these other 2 layers. So if you want to delete a layer, you can click, drag it to the trash can. If you want to delete a layer, you can also click the little 3 lines here and hit delete layer 2. Both work just fine. So that's layers. Anything that's on top in the layers, similar to Photoshop, will show up on top in the drawing itself. So if layer 2 is on top of collage and I draw something on it, that shows up on top of the layer that's below it. If I click and drag that layer in the list down, suddenly that layer is below the collage layer and it doesn't show. So the layer order matters, and the layer order is changeable. So let's see. So that's sort of the layer panel. I am going to lock the collage layer for now, so that way when I'm tracing or drawing on top of it, it doesn't move, and I can make new layers that I draw on top of the collage itself. Another thing that is sort of key in working in Illustrator are the tools on the left. So this black arrow is called the selection tool. It allows me to select things within the drawing that aren't on locked layers. Notice I can't select the collage itself, but it allows me to select, and by clicking and dragging, I can move things around in the drawing. What's called the direct selection tool works a little differently. If I click on it and then I click on the rectangle, notice now that these anchor points show up that are forming sort of the vector rectangle itself. So within Illustrator, you're always working with, when you're drawing, you're working with points and lines that connect the points. The collage itself is actually a raster image that we just opened, so there's, you notice there's not points and lines, it's just an image itself. But as we start to draw, we're going to be using vectors, which are points and connected by lines. Some of these tools have these little tiny white triangles at the bottom right. That just means that there's other tools buried underneath them. So if you click and hold, it shows the other options of the tools that exist kind of hiding underneath the toolbars. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The next tool that's important on this side is the pen tool. So this is the tool where you can draw shapes, again, by clicking points and connecting lines. So I'm just clicking. Notice as my sort of pen gets close to the anchor point I started with, that little circle appears right below the pen tool itself. That's just showing you that if you were to click that, it creates a closed shape. And so if I go back to my selection tool, now notice I have this completely closed shape I can move around. If you want to just make lines, you can certainly draw, lines and then hit enter to finish. Just a line itself, and you don't have to create closed shapes. One of the things that is important with the pen tool is sort of this fill and stroke bar down here. So if I click the little arrow here, I can flip kind of what is, like this right now has a dark black stroke and this is the white fill. I can flip that. Notice that now I have a white stroke and a dark fill. You can adjust color. So one way to adjust color is to double click on the fill, and it comes up with what's called the color picker, and I can move around. I can slide this bar up and down to get the different colors themselves, and I can move sort of my mouse around to get different tints of that color itself. So that's one way that you can pick different colors. The same thing works with the stroke. So if you double click on the stroke, same thing will come up. So the color picker will come up again for you, and you can select colors that way. Another way of using color within Illustrator is actually in the panels on the right. And so maybe as you were working, maybe the color bar over here opened. You can also select colors using sliders. So if you had specific CMYK color numbers that you were looking to use, sometimes if you're matching a paint color or matching a specific color value, you can enter in those numbers themselves and then select colors that way, or you can just slide them around and kind of get color just by choosing. Again, there's another CMYK spectrum. You can eyedrop down here as well. Another useful tool is the swatches. So you can make new swatches, kind of like making a new layer. You can click a new swatch by clicking the little folded rectangle here. You can name them. Normally I just leave the name as to whatever it's saying because I don't really care, but if this was like your I don't know, the color that you wanted to use for the walls, you could call it wall color, or if you wanted to name the specific lavender purple color, you could, or you could make it green. But then you hit OK, and so now suddenly it always opens this library. It wants you to like save everything to the cloud. I always ignore that part. You can do that, look into that if you'd like. But now I have this green that I can make. If I want to make more shapes that are green later, it's really easy to, if you're working in a file, sometimes like that green, you've clicked off of it, you've used like something else instead. You can come over by selecting the rectangle itself and then clicking on the swatch, it turns it sort of that green color. So kind of a useful tool. You can make endless swatches. You can load swatches in this little, it looks like a couple books stacked together. This is the library on the left, so you can load sort of predefined swatches that have been established by Illustrator. So maybe I want to do like ice cream, and it gives you all of these options that are apparently colors of different ice creams. Sometimes it's useful to use that if you're just trying to sort of use like a selection of colors that makes sense for a project, kind of selecting like a starting point and then generating colors off of a few of them can be kind of nice. So the other, let's see, so those are sort of typical swatches. We'll talk more about those in a minute. You can also like create your own libraries and load them, download them from the internet and load them. So there's plenty of options for kind of establishing swatch colors in a drawing from predefined sources if you don't want to come up with them on your own. The color guide is a useful tool. So the way that this works is whatever color is sort of selected here, by clicking this, it kind of gives you, in this case, a range of the vivid and to the right and then muted versions of that same color. It gives you sort of some complementary colors or colors that it would pair with it in that version. If you click the little like 3 lines here, you can select like different options. So maybe I want warm and cool colors. That gives me some colors that take the green and then make the cool version and then the warm version of it. If you liked these colors, you could go through and you could add, notice that I still have that thing selected, so it changed that color when I clicked on it, so be careful of that. But, you could go through and like add each of these colors to the swatches, again, if you have it selected, I hit swatch, it'll make a new one for me. Again, that libraries thing is kind of annoying. But there's the red, orangish red color from the color guide. You can also do, let's see, if you click color guide options, you can tell it that you want lots and lots of steps. So if you're trying to find like a palette of colors that are maybe similar, maybe you want lots of like blues and purples and reds and you want more options than just the 4, you can give it more steps or fewer steps, and you can change the variation between sort of the colors also. So that's kind of a useful tool, the color guide. Swatches, color, useful for kind of selecting things. With this exercise, we are going to be using black and white, but just so you know, that's where it is. Another thing that's important with the pen tool, especially when you're drawing lines, is considering line weight. And so you can make lines that are colored, but you can also make lines that are just black, white, and gray. So if I select all the lines and I just want to change them all to a black stroke for now, to duplicate something, I'm just holding Option, and then if I hold Shift, it keeps it straight, so that's kind of a useful thing. So just a way of quickly duplicating things. But in any case, maybe you've drawn a series of lines. You can change like how thick they are, so you can change the line weight in Illustrator by opening Stroke and then changing the weight. So you can go up and down. Maybe you have like a heavy line weight, a medium line weight, and a thin line weight. The other thing you can do with this is create dashed lines. So maybe I'll just copy these over. So you can make dashed lines as well. So by clicking dashed, and then you can set the distance of the dash and the distance of the gap. So right now that's just, it defaults to 12, but maybe I want a dashed line that is like tighter, and maybe I want the gap to be exactly the same. But maybe in this one, I want the dash to be tighter, but I want the spacing between it to be bigger. You can do that. Or smaller, I guess, in that case. You can also set like a pattern that repeats. So it could be that you have one dash that's short, and then one dash that's long, and then you can adjust the spacing that way. So, lots of opportunity there. Let's see. A couple other things about that are useful to understand is creating arrows. You might not use as many arrows on this drawing. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But if you want to create like diagrams, a lot of times arrows are useful in creating diagrams. There's different arrowheads. So under stroke, the arrowheads, this one is going to have the arrow point in sort of one direction. And then if I select the other side, I can have arrows pointing both ways, or maybe I just want a one-sided arrow. You can flip it easily by clicking the swap end and arrowheads button on the right, so you can do that. This changes the scale of the arrowhead itself. So if I want like that shape of arrow, but I want it to be bigger, you can change it by adjusting the size. Those are kind of the important things. Another thing that's not as important to understand now, but might be later, is like you can adjust like where exactly the sort of point ends on a drawing. So this allows you to have like kind of smoother corners or like tight corners, rounded ends. So if you like the idea of your end not being orthogonal, you can adjust that. So I think it's just important. It comes into play when you're creating like enclosed like shapes as well, like where the point exists. So that is stroke. Again, with the pen tool, you're clicking points to create shapes, and then, once you've done that, if you don't want to fill on your shape, you want it to just be open, you can click the none fill, and then if you click back on the stroke, this is where you can edit sort of the thickness of it here. So you can draw the shapes with one line weight, and then adjust it later. Notice that the Illustrator remembers the line weight that you used most recently. So if I make this 3, when I go use the pen tool again, notice that it changed back to 3. Or if I change it up to like 8, then when I use the pen tool again, it remembers that most recent one that I've used for me. So that's kind of the pen tool, shapes. I think those kind of the selection tools are helpful. Like if I've drawn something and it doesn't quite line up, you can always move the anchors around. This is helpful for moving, again, the image itself. So let's see, selection tool, direct selection tool, pen tool. Shapes, if you click and hold, there's lots of different options for shapes that you can draw. So I can just draw rectangles really easily. There's also a star. I'm not sure if you'll use that on this, but just know that there's shapes. Again, it remembers what you used most recently, so you just have to go back to rectangle if that's what you wanted to use. I doubt we'll use text in this project, but if you did want to add text, you can, click and it fills the box with placeholder text for you. But you can change the size of it and type, within the box. You can change the sort of typeface or font, and then if the font has options, you can change that there as well. Most of these other tools, the eyedropper tool is really helpful. It's a way of like matching sort of the properties of something to another shape. So if I drew this star and I wanted it to have sort of maybe I wanted it to be green with this stroke, I could select, and then if I hold Option or Alt, I could then paint with that same feature. But maybe I don't want a green star, maybe I just want it to have this bold line weight. So again, I select what I'm matching from and then hold Option to paint it. You can also do it the other way around, so if you select your star, you can paint something else that same color. Let's see. Pan is just this hand. It's kind of nice sometimes to just be able to move around without accidentally selecting something with the selection tool, so I use that every once in a while. You can use the zoom by clicking this. I typically am just holding Option and scrolling with the middle sort of scroll bar on my mouse, and you can scroll in and out with any tool selected if you do that. So it's Option and scroll. So let's see, that's color, stroke. Again, character and paragraph, that's for typing if you're going to do it. Layers, the layers matter. I would say, once you've sort of drawn this project, like maybe you've drawn your shapes, you've done your solid fills for the solid void, and you've done sort of the line weights and hatches and patterns, I would say it's good to sort of remove the collage. You can turn it off when you save out, or you can delete it. Turning it off works just fine. The one other thing I could show is if you wanted to use textures or patterns, you can find those in swatches as well. So if I go to swatches, I go to the library, and I go to patterns, there's different sort of dots and lines under patterns that you might explore. So you might load sort of the basic dots, and maybe maybe some of the texture or some of these sort of perspective moments, maybe those get a dot pattern. And again, notice that I had the stroke selected that time instead of the fill, so just make sure you have the right one selected to sort of start to see the pattern itself. So you can play around with, if you just keep going back to that library, there's a couple other options under patterns, maybe like lines is another one that's kind of nice. You can very easily start to add a fair amount of detail to a drawing without having to draw all the lines themselves. So it's interesting if you're using like the fills, suddenly what would have taken a while to draw, your lines are, many lines for just filling in a shape. So let's see, I think that is all we have for today, other than saving out. So once you've drawn all of your sort of shapes themselves, the drawing will look much more complex than this one, but turn off that collage layer, and then we'll go File, Save a Copy. If you haven't saved along the way, I should have started that. So File, Save As, save the Adobe Illustrator file first. So you have like the editable file in case you need to go back and make changes. You should do that in the very beginning of the tutorial. I should have said that. So do that, save, and save often. Once you've saved the Illustrator file, go File, Save a Copy, save as a PDF, and then name it accordingly. So I'll do my last name, and then this is Project 8, so Whitehurst P8. You're supposed to save them, and then hit save. And here's where I would say we don't need the PDF to be editable later, meaning I don't need to get back in there and open all of the layers, because I'm just saving out a file to upload. So I'll hit Save PDF, hit OK, and then it'll save out the file. One thing I will show in case, so you need to down save files for later if you have a really large file size. I think it's helpful to know this. So if I open my file using Adobe Acrobat, which is, if you're paying for the Creative Suite, then you get this for free. If you go File, Reduce File Size, it asks you where you want to save it, and then you hit Save. I'm just going to replace over the same file I just used, but it'll down save for you pretty well. The other thing that you can do if that doesn't take out or save out too much of a smaller size, you can save as an optimized PDF. And this is where under compression you can edit things. Normally I'll go 150 for 150 ppi. If you change that, that's another way of down saving files. So when you're remember this when you're uploading your portfolios next semester in the fall, because I think it'll be a helpful thing. So if I hit OK, again it asks me where I want to save it. I'm just going to save over that same one. That'll save out the file and make the file size even smaller for you. Okay? So thank you. This has been a tutorial for Adobe Illustrator, Introduction, and Adobe Acrobat.